Today we're going to be doing my technique that I call champagne taste beer budget. These are the supplies you're going to need. I'll go over them real quick. A spray primer that matches your paint color. I choose a satin finish instead of flat, it goes on smoother. And then you'll also need a paintbrush. I prefer a 2-inch. Next up we have a sample paint I got for $1.25 in the paint department. This was actually a mist tint, so the color itself doesn't have a name, but if you're looking for a good green, Darling Jade by Sherwin-Williams is a good one. And then you'll also need some 400 grit sandpaper. Some wood stain, this color is called Early American, I wouldn't go any lighter than this. A mouse head sander with a medium grit paper. A sealer, I really like this clear satin sealing spray, it goes on pretty evenly and dries super fast. If you decide to refinish your hardware, pick a paint color out for that, I love this pure gold one. You will also need a power drill or screwdriver, as well as some kind of lint-free cloth. And the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is remove all of the hardware from our piece. Once that's done, wash it really good. I use a mixture of Dawn dish soap and water. It works really well, but you can use other cleaners if you choose to. I also vacuum out the inside and wipe that down and then flip it on its back and get underneath as well. The only time I really pre-sand is if it has like a rough surface. Sometimes you may need that mouse head sander, but for the most part, you can just use that 400 grit sandpaper and go over it gently. You'll only need about 1 coat of that spray primer, and you don't have to cover every square inch of the piece. In fact, I like to leave some of the little grooves and detailing bare because it'll end up adding a little bit of dimension to your piece. You can kind of see here that natural wood is still left underneath that primer in the little gaps and spaces, and it looks rad. I'm a little bit of a hoarder. These were drawer liners, they're rubber that were in an antique dresser I refinished like 6 months ago, but I found another purpose for them. Instead of taping off the sides of my drawers, I just lay it across and it prevents paint from getting on anything. They work perfect. I also use them on the sides of my drawers to protect the dovetailing because it's a lost art. I want to keep it original. And I just repeat the priming process onto the structure of my piece. Now, if you're painting a dresser or something larger, you're probably going to need 2 cans of that primer. Again, I left a little bit of that wood peeking through the primer to add that dimension later on. Your priming base will probably look a little bit like this, a little spotty, totally normal, it's okay. To prevent that streaky brush look, make sure you wipe off the excess off your paintbrush, it'll help a lot. And then get to painting. Notice how when I paint this drawer, I don't try to get those little grooves and cracks. Leave them the natural wood and you'll see why later. I don't recommend painting that bottom ledge of the drawer because sometimes when you slide it later on, it'll end up sticking. I'm on that second drawer and I just wanted to show you this little technique I have to help your strokes look more flawless. To kind of hide that little ledge of where your paint ends, just do a couple strokes up and down. And then swipe it again horizontal and feather it out and it'll make it look smooth and you can't really see where your strokes begin and where they end. I'm finished painting the drawers. I did 2 coats on each. I haven't decided if I'm going to paint the hardware yet, so for now I am going to just soak it and wash it. And then next, just move on to painting the structure of your base using that exact same technique that we used for the drawers. You'll notice on the inside where the drawers slide into, there might be a line of wood stain. This indicates that that area will show even with the drawers pushed in, so just make sure you paint it. Okay, I am here to normalize brush burrs because they happen. You'll notice like a little hair, it's a brush fiber. I wet it with paint and then just scratch it gently with my nail. Make sure you don't remove a bunch of layers, just enough to peel it off. Once you get it off, you just touch it up with paint. This is probably going to happen a lot, no big deal. So you'll notice to the right of my brush, you can see where little pieces snapped off. It's usually because the brush got too dry. Don't be me, you can even wash it with a little bit of water and dry it off again before you start painting and that will help prevent the burrs. It's completely normal to be covered in paint and if you're not, there's usually 3 reasons why. 1, you're wearing gloves and probably a lot of clothes. 2, you're superhuman. And last but not least, you're not doing it right. After 2 layers, I am done painting. You can choose to stop here if you're happy with the outcome, but I'm definitely going for that ironically charming furniture in an evil witch's cottage in the middle of a dark forest, so let's go. Next step, you're going to need your mouse head sander with a medium grit sandpaper, and we're going to lightly distress the edges. Don't apply a lot of pressure, it'll strip off your paint, and you definitely cannot use a rotating sander. That would be catastrophic. When doing this part, just have fun and think about the way furniture would naturally distress. Guys, my sander was trying to die on me. I did not think it was going to make it through this tutorial. So when I say think about the way furniture naturally distresses, it's really just like the sides and the edges. When you're done distressing, take another piece of that lint-free cloth and just wipe all the dust off. You 100% need to make sure it's all gone. Any areas you didn't mean to hit with the sand or just touch up with paint, you can use a little brush or a finger. I always use my finger because I'm so professional. And this is how my distressing turned out. I was pretty stoked with it. I think it turned out lovely. The next step in this process is magical. You'll need to go ahead and grab your lint-free cloth. I use this sheet and just tear pieces off as needed. You'll need a total of 2 separate pieces. Also grab your wood stain and if you have them, some gloves. Grab one of your lint-free cloths and saturate it with the wood stain and just slap it on there. Don't be afraid of using too much because this is a satin paint. It doesn't absorb it very quickly, so you can use as much as you want. Just remember though, we have to wipe it off, so don't get too wild. If you want that glazy look to be more prominent, I would use an eggshell paint just because it'll absorb a little bit more. Don't use a flat. It won't turn out good, I promise you. You can always use a darker stain as well. I just wouldn't use anything lighter than the early American color that I'm using. Once you get it coated pretty good, you're just going to wipe it off with that other lint-free cloth. So right now I only have one drawer done, but I just wanted to show you the comparison. The top does not have the wood stain, the bottom does, and it just makes the color pop. Here on the top, you can see that dimension that I was talking about. So I know that there's a term, trust the process, and right here, that's exactly what I'm gonna need you to do. I know it looks super crazy, but yeah, whatever. Just make sure your rag is completely saturated because if you take a dry rag and rub it around like this, you could potentially scratch the paint. We don't want to do that at all. Once you get a decent amount of that stain on there, you can go ahead and take the other dry cloth and lightly wipe away the excess stain. And this part's kind of fun because you can just play with it. If you want it thicker and heavier in some areas than others, you can go ahead and do that. And once again, check out that dimension, man. Moving on to the ceiling, you'll hold your can about 8 inches away from the paint. And I like to do 2 coats on everything except for the top. The top I do 3 coats. So remember earlier I threw my hardware in a bucket of soapy water. It's been soaking and I think I've decided to paint it. I'm really digging this pure gold color. I think it will look great against the green. Be super careful not to overcoat it because it will never dry. I'm foreshadowing, guys. Okay, right about now, you're probably really confused that I'm sanding this after I just sealed it. And I'll be the first to tell you that things go wrong all the time when flipping furniture. For instance, a bug just defecated on my sealer as it was drying. If anything goes wrong in this process or you just don't like your sealer, it turned out spotty, once it dries, take that 400 grit sandpaper and just lightly sand off that top layer until it looks like this. Take a damp rag and remove that excess sanding dust and let it dry and then touch up your paint spot and then repeat the entire staining process again. It's so much fun. What's super funny is this whole bug issue is like a constant thing to me. It happens to about 30% of furniture I refinish. I think they're attracted to the paint, but I fixed it. Looks good. This is my absolute favorite part of the process, just adding that hardware back on. Make sure it's completely dry before you start messing with it. Otherwise, you will have to start all over. So remember that little foreshadowing that I talked about earlier? I put too much paint on the top knob and it was super tacky and I tried to put it on anyway and I ruined it. When this happens, the first thing you have to do is try to smooth out that top layer of paint before you repaint it. And the best way that I do that is you got to cool the paint down. I went ahead and grabbed that cold damp rag that I had used to clean the piece in the very beginning, and I just buffed and smoothed it out and then repainted it. Had a little donut break while I waited for the paint to dry. And honestly, it was just taking way too long, so I'm going to show you guys my unprofessional trick. I put it in the freezer next to my ice creams, and look at that, 5 minutes later, and it's good to go. That weird frosty look will go away once the paint starts to warm back up. And then I just reattached it, and I am so in love with this piece. Right now I'm just staging it and getting it ready to post for sale. This one's a hard one for me to let go of, but I'm so happy with the outcome. It's a massive difference. It's just a bright and happy vibe, for sure. I hope that this tutorial was helpful. This technique is a great alternative to using those antiquing waxes, and the sealer lasts much longer. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Okay, bye!